This is
the
Bhangra Podcast.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
My name is Ram Mahalingham, and I am a member of the Bhangra Podcast.
Hi, I am Sid. I am also a member of the Bhangra Podcast.
Yeah, and today we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the performances from eBhangra and get, just dive a little bit deeper on some feedback and overall what went down and talk a little bit about the teams. Sid, what were some of your high-level takeaways coming out of eBhangra?
I think the first high-level takeaway that should stick out for everybody is you have to dance well in this setting. You can't get away with average to below average dancing. And when I say dancing, like the actual ability of your dancers, for one. Number two, the fundamentals, bouncing your shoulders, the energy side of things of actually getting your legs up, proper posture, strength in your arms and legs, like doing the moves with strength. The fundamentals just absolutely need to be there, for one. Number two, impact. If you're not creating any impact via your routine, if you're not creating any moments in your routine that actually stick out, and when I say impact, is leaving an impression on the viewer. It's making the viewer go, "Oh man, that was sweet," right? Like, you remember certain things that Fertile did. You remember certain things that Brigade did. For other teams, there's some teams that don't remember a single thing that they did, right? And that's a problem, right? You didn't leave any lasting impression or have any impact. I think those are two that we can start with, because we'll delve into the freshness idea later here. But what were your high-level quick hits, Rom?
I think I do think, to your point, teams need to stop thinking about this as a traditional Bhangra competition. There's nothing traditional about it. And I think that needs to start trickling down into the performances. I felt at certain points people were taking a whole routine and smashing it together versus thinking about, okay, I'm dancing now for two minutes with 6 people. What's like the best utilization of my dancers and the choreography in those 2 minutes that is going to make people remember this performance and remember how well we dance. So I would say that's step one, right? I think that's a lot of it has to do with how people move, the kinds of steps you're going to incorporate, the kinds of segments you're going to incorporate, and also how are you going to, slow down, speed up, or provide some dynamicism in a very short amount of time. And so we'll get into that with the teams. I also feel that there is that this competition is now going to be more international, which means there's going to be a lot of different teams potentially applying. In subsequent rounds, we saw it with Brigade this time around, where you're going to have a team with a specific style that might be counter to what we're used to seeing in North America and in the U.S. And more often than not, we go to a Bhangra in the Bird, we go to a Boston. You're going to see a lot of teams very similarly from across the U.S. There's going to be obvious changes in the styles, but I think there's going to be very similar templates and build-ups to the routines. And I think with Brigade, you're going to see instances where teams are going to be completely new, and it's going to feel completely different, and that is going to be weighed, and I think going to have an impact to how teams are scored ultimately. I do think Brigade brought a very fresh and different perspective on set construction, emphasis on dancing, emphasis on specific points of their routine, and I think that caused them to really stand out, and it helped them overall. Not saying that they weren't a great dancing team, they were. Not saying they didn't have great performances, they did, but it became stark, and I think that led to some changes in scoring. So I'm curious to see how that plays out over time, but I would not be surprised that continues to happen as we have more and more eBhangras into the future.
Yeah, a couple things I kind of want to piggy off of what Ram just said. The first thing he said is not thinking of it like a traditional competition and trying to pack too much in to a minute, minute and a half type setting. And I want to kind of pick on Brigade a little bit in their first round video. I remember watching the stream chat and people saying that Brigade got robbed in round 1. I understood the sentiment because of what Ram was saying, is because they stood out and it was just like, wow, I've never seen this before. This is beautiful. But a big reason why I think that they got second was because of Ram's point, saying that they tried to pack too much in to one segment. Right? They were doing. They started off fine with the Dhamal segment. It was beautiful to watch with the shoulders. Then they're doing a normal Bhangra segment, and then all of a sudden it drops into the Jumar segment. Right? That transition right there was just so abrupt, and it didn't flow. Right? that in itself, had they just found a way to I'm not saying they shouldn't have done Jumur, but maybe they shouldn't have for exactly what Ram is saying in terms of, trying to pack too much in, right? And because of that abrupt transition, for me, like that's where they lost it for Thiele. I mean, the door was open for them to win, but win round one, I'm saying. But because of that, idea that maybe they're trying to pack too much in, and either that or they just didn't transition into Jumur in a way that felt less abrupt and actually worked and actually flowed correctly. That would have helped them. And then the freshness idea that Ram's bringing up, and to also use Brigade as the good example here is, there's been a lot of discussions about what that actually means. And Ram, I kind of want to tee it up for you, but it's one of those things where when you're watching all of these routines and there's that one team that stands out because they were different in a good way, right? It's not just to say be different, right? Like that idea of being fresh. If we're not going to use the dance world, if we're going to use a completely different realm here, if we talk about just you're there, it's a hot summer day and you start drinking some Sprite, it's refreshing because it's like it's not dry, it's not like drinking just a warm glass of water, which might be just the standard thing you drink on a daily basis, right? It's refreshing, but it's not, and it's refreshing in a good way. It's not refreshing in a what was that kind of way. Like I don't like Dr. Pepper, so if I drank Dr. Pepper, I'd be like, what the F, That's not refreshing to me.
Yeah.
But again, everybody has their own versions of what that might be, and that's just the nature of being human and where we are. But go ahead, Ram, take it from there.
Yeah, I would say the big thing a lot of people don't consider, even as prospective judges going into a competition, is how these differences manifest themselves and how it influences the scoring. If I'm captain of a team, I know at my time when I was captain of FCB, and Sid, you were obviously there with me, a lot was put into like variations of specific steps, like Fumania. How are we going to drop into things like Jugani? How are we going to, make variations into a Jumur segment to stand out and be a little bit different? What Brigade is doing, and I think where there's a level of reward, is they are taking a step back and looking kind of end to end. And I don't think they're intentionally doing this, but it is an intentional outcome in certain ways when you're competing internationally. Their view of what a good routine looks like and what's going to be good for this competition is different than a lot of the other teams. I thought there was a lot of, trends of pace and variations. A lot of teams relied, I thought, on very cool or very different variations and that build up and payoff structure. Whereas I thought Brigade was more simple, less about the actual move variations and more about the variations in pacing and dynamics of the actual routine. And that kind of different setup, which I thought was unique amongst all the teams performing, does strike you differently. It's almost as if someone took rather than taking the building blocks and rearranging them a new way, it was like they went back to the cupboard, pulled out another set of building blocks, and redid it in a separate structure with different rules, and ultimately it paid off very, very well for them, right? And I would say for teams that are trying to make themselves memorable, make themselves stand out, the question I think you should be asking is, there are going to be move variations, choreography variations. I think we saw it obviously being done very well with Ferdile, and they got rewarded for it. I thought some of those variations were fantastic that will carry the day. But also thinking about, if you're not going to be able to compete on that variation level, if you're not going to be able to pull, all of the variations or think through all of them, and you still want to be competitive in your own unique way, I think there is an element of, do we want to focus on just the move variations, or can we also think about pacing? Can we also think about, front time? Can we also think about movement, and apply it a little bit differently, knowing that, Sid, minute and a half, man, that's we're essentially just watching an extended Vine compilation. That's what it feels like. It's 7-second bits. It's not a lot of time. Like, maximizing your time might not be effective if a complicated variation doesn't work out, and you haven't put a lot of emphasis on the rest of the dancing. That puts you at a disadvantage, right? And I would say, Sid, I think teams have to think about what playing to their strengths and also thinking about incorporating their identity a little bit more. And maybe that requires a little bit more thinking on what do we want to do for a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Yeah, and I think that something that we will definitely get into as we analyze some of the videos here. I think that in this type of format, it's all about, again, it's as much as it's a different format. Some of the rules are the same, is that you need to stand out and leave a lasting impression. And in this specific instance, and again, I think it's the exact same as a 12-person routine or 16-person routine for 8 minutes, is creating those moments that actually work. And we see the teams that they're trying to do. We know what they're trying to do with variations or certain steps that they're doing, but it's not enough just to do a variation. It's not enough just to do a cool step, because a cool step to you, it's only cool because you saw some other team do it in such a way that was wow. You watched some other team do, some step, and it was wow for you. You can't just take out that step and then it's going to be wow for everybody else. How did they set it up? What happened before and after that step? What was the mix doing? What was the formation? Was there a mechanism? There's so much that goes into individual moments. It's not just an individual step that is awesome, right? It's the whole big picture. So let's get into, we're going to dissect, kind of quickly round 2, all of the videos in round 2, just to give insight as to what Ram and I thought as we watched. So we'll start with Fertile. The notes that I took as I watched, again, I only watched all these videos one time and just took some notes. I even did my own scoring. Maybe we'll post that at a later time. But I loved their the scenery, like I don't know how the day was just so purple for them, but it was pretty cool. And then the intro wave was sweet. The quick hits with the locking sounds, and then they did it like 4 or 5 times within a matter of 10 seconds, and it was just like, all right, it's enough, right? So that when we think about that idea of how to score creativity, doing it too much, when it comes too much, you might not get all the points that you want to get there. The movement that they had when the two guys were going from screen right to screen left through the line, like that's an example that I want to point out to teams, is that's a simple idea that is, we can call it a mechanism, we can call it just something different, but it's easy to understand, right? And we get, Ram, you know exactly what I'm talking about here, where teams try to do something crazy.
Yep.
And they know it's awesome, but for a first-time viewer, might not be able to process what happens. Like if it takes, and I know we were culprits of this back in the day, but if it takes a viewer 3-4 times to watch it to then figure out what actually happened, and then it's like, oh, that was cool, it's too late, right? The only view that matters is the first one, and that's a really good example of a cool thing that, again, makes sense. It was easy to follow and understand what was going on, that actually worked and hit. Didn't really like their fuss variation. I think it needed to be done like maybe once more for it to hit. Just the idea just came and went, and it was also one that it felt like it was like the poppy stuff again. Their movement out in and out of the circle was really well done. The fake intro didn't really add anything. The Fumonia was kind of whatever. And so those couple things that I'm biting on, right, or I'm taking stabs at, is probably why Fertile's score took a little bit of a hit in creativity and impact.
Yeah, I would say, out of the 3 videos that I've seen from them, right, their winning video, their first round video, and then this, I think this is their weakest performance. I would say, especially in the beginning, it's a little sloppy. Like when they're doing a couple of the line switches, especially when they're doing the Jadusingha and then the 2 guys are going across, and then everyone's doing some variation. I think it's a Punjab variation, and then they go into the quick chaw. They're just not, the execution is not at the level for, I think, a very simplistic set of moves, right? I think the reason that Fertile has won this competition and the reason that they got first place is in a large part because the little intermediary moves between specific creative elements were done extremely, extremely well. I thought the dancers were fantastic in doing that, and is a big reason why they were successful. Didn't happen for me on this performance. I also wasn't a fan of the Fumonia variation and the little break that was taken there. It just did not sit right with me. I just didn't feel like it was necessary, right? It was just one of those things where, why did you do it? It wasn't even a great variation to start, right? Like it wasn't anything I'd necessarily seen before, and the break wasn't something I was a fan of. I did think that the ending from a dancing perspective, like the Jadusingha into the throws back into the Jadusingha and the jumps, was done very well. But again, there's the little bit of the little variation at the end where people in the back are doing jumps and in the front are doing other things. It wasn't something that was pleasing. I would have appreciated more, I think, from an audience perspective, if everyone was doing a little bit more of the same, right? I thought the beginning, to your point, didn't start out super strong. The ending didn't also inspire me in a lot of ways, or it wasn't an impactful ending in the way I would have appreciated it, or even from a dancing perspective. But I think it also goes to show that even though the dancing quality wasn't as high as I normally would have thought, and the bar that they set themselves up for, it was still obviously very, very good, right? Like it goes to show what a truly excellent dancing team can still do, even if all the ideas don't resonate, even if it doesn't have the highest of impacts.
Amen. And now on to Who Share. Love the location with the stadium in the background. It's just so sick. Like it was so cool. The first thing I wrote down for them was that you just need to work on form, and that should not be the first thing that I'm writing. Right? It's just the first thing out the gate is that you're displaying that your form is not on point. That's got you got to work on that, and it's got to be something that Who Share, you guys have to just hunker down and work on the dancing and get the form and the ability to dance up to par. The beginning of the Fumonia was okay, and then the mechanism was really awesome. I was confused by the girl-guy setup because there was like it was a triangle trapezoid type thing, and there was 2 guys and 3 girls, and the setup it didn't actually look congruent. And that's just something that you just shouldn't do. Like, why am I writing this down? I mean, this is for every team out there that can learn from this. Is don't give me the opportunity to write these negative things down.
Right.
As I keep going again, I'm not writing anything cool about the ideas. I'm writing down choreo dash needs to think idea. Like you need to think through these ideas better. I know this is all chicken scratch, but basically what I mean is like we need to be thinking about these ideas better so that you can create moments and things that will be remembered. Right. Another thing that and to piggy off that later, the drop into Jugni was okay. It wasn't anything to write home about. Nothing crazy cool. It was just there. And something else to keep in mind for the younger teams out there that are not as talented, that don't have the depth, let's say. The girl that came to the front for them all, like she's the best dancer, and she came to the front and was noticed just too late. And it's not to say, it's not a knock on any dancer that is not as good as her, but the reality is that this is a competition, and you need your best dancers in this kind of situation to be able to carry more of the load to help you out, like help the overall team out. It's not to say that the not as good dancers don't deserve front time or shouldn't get any front time. That's not what I'm saying. But you need to map that out correctly and make sure that when those dancers are in the front, they are dancing in a way that I don't even know that they're a back dancer, right? Like I don't know if that makes sense, Ron, but basically, where I'm going with it is we need to, the circuit at large, like you just need to think it through and be smarter about when and where you're putting your dancers, right? And if you need to, have that red Geordie that is sometimes a little too much in the front, so be it. But be smart about how you're using your rotation to give your back dancers the front time and make sure that they are well trained on when they are visible and noticeable. So, Ron, take it away.
Yeah, I would say, I don't want to nitpick on the same things that Sid talked about. One of the things I really noticed that threw me off across a lot of the performances is that it's obviously a very high energy performance, but I think there's a little bit of flailing when it comes to the arms and the legs. And what I mean by that, it's very much not there's a lot of circuitous motions where when you're slapping your thigh, you're not kind of cutting it off. You're going like in a huge circular motion and cutting down. And there's a lot of instances, like when you're doing punches, when you're like rotating your legs, there's a lot of excessive, I don't want to call it excessive movement, because a lot of teams have been successful in doing these kinds of stylistic changes. But what it requires is that when you're going through, like, I think there's a moment where they're doing a bunch of punches and, a woman comes to the front of the performance. You're doing a bunch of arm rotations and then sitting down and then about to go into them all. The thing that throws me off with their performance especially is that it's not, I don't think individually it's a big deal, but it's kind of systemic throughout the performance, is that you get a lot of different people putting their arms in different locations, right? And I think the goal when you're especially moving from formation to formation when you're doing simpler choreography, is to be as pristine and as precise as possible. And so I would challenge Hucher, it's one or the other. It's either you keep the style, right, and you clean it, and teams have been successful doing that. I would, I think if that's part of the identity, definitely do that. Or I think be cleaner with some of the movement and say like, hey, we're going to cut this off for precision, for a level of accuracy, because we want people to do things the same way. And it's pretty obvious to me, to your earlier point with the back dancers and the front dancers, when you have extra movement and the front dancers with their front time are kind of going a little bit harder, you can see those discrepancies and they become magnified. And even though it's not a big deal for this individual performance, it does become big when you're comparing teams and you're seeing other teams with a higher degree of precision across the board. All right, Sid, so we just talked through a couple teams. Why don't we talk about the Vegas betting favorites, Bhangra Brigade from India?
So yeah, I mean, it's we talked about that freshness earlier, and no team is doing what Brigade does, right? And one of the things that Brigade does differently than the North American circuit is the way that they bounce their shoulders. And it's crazy cool to watch. The amount of grace that they have in their dancing is also amazing to watch. But a key thing to think about is that the impact that they had was because of the two things that I talked about, right? Like, there was impact in watching the way they bounced their shoulders. There's impact in watching how graceful they were. And you saw it in the immediate beginning of their whole routine. I thought that whenever they stopped and they did the ch, and then they right out of that they did that quick hit thing. I didn't think that was set up well. I think it could have been better set up because it just kind of happened and it just didn't have the impact that it should have had. After that, they started going fast. The spin into the fast drummer step I thought was just I don't know why, it just was really just well done. I mean, it was a synchronization, but I did write that down as a moment for them. The head thing during Fumonia, they all turned to the 90, and then they all moved their head at the same time right before they started the Fumonia. It was sick. I wanted something more during the pause in the Fumonia, and then when they dropped into Jugni, they did the 1, 2, 3, 4, then they dropped into it. Mm-hmm. Something about the mix needed to change there to accentuate the change more, if that makes sense. And then the variation that they did with the hand holding, I thought it was sick. So overall, really well done. And what about you, Ram?
Yeah, I really liked. I didn't mind the chit as much. I thought that was a very good pause. I thought the Fumonia variation, like the little pause and freeze, it's not new, right? But I think we're talking about it now, but I think in the course of the competition, I can understand why it's a different approach, right? It's not meant to be new. It's less focused on the actual variation and more focused on the dramatic effect of the step, mm-hmm. right? Which is a fundamental difference in how they approach their choreography. I thought the hand holding thing at the end was great. I thought just no one else was going to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's something I've seen before, but just no one else did that step the entire competition, right? So it is unique and creative in that sense, where it is the shiny kind of separate toy. I don't know what it is, but teams outside of North America just put a lot of time into videography, right? I'm talking about Australia teams, I'm talking about India teams, I'm talking about UK teams, and this is no different. And people will probably say, like, why is Ram talking about it? It doesn't have anything to do with the dancing. Well, in a virtual competition where you're recording videos, the fact that that everyone is framed so well, you could clearly see the dancers. Like, it looks like it was shot in something close to like 4K almost, right? And you can actually see everyone's bodies and the dancing and the shoulders and all of the different components from a nutcracker perspective makes it so much more powerful. I compare it to the Hucher videos. I compare it to BAM's videos. I compare it to some of the other teams that were a little bit further away from the camera, and it's hard to not think about that, especially in considering how that set was constructed and how much it focused on the actual dancing itself.
Legit. So yeah, let's move on to Bhangra theory. And I do want to start off with, I didn't really write down too much for this team, and I want to make that known as not a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but it's not helpful in the sense that I'm writing down multiple things for Brigade, multiple things for Thile, and for Theory, obviously I was cracking up at the fact that they took your guys' audio into the mix. Really well done with that nice little touch there. They had a mechanism with the V, with one side of the V was in Berka and the other was not, but it wasn't anything crazy. I wrote down that Fumania at the start, like I kind of couldn't see that it was like Fumania's steps, so that's a problem. And then I also wrote down that the mechanism they did with the two dudes, on their butts and the girls on the outside, it was also that part was really well done, and that's all I wrote. And so the takeaway really is that nothing outside of what I wrote down stood out. So you're not really hurting yourself, but you're not helping yourself. I want to see Theory get more aggressive and do more with the choreography in the making more moments out of it. And I didn't have anything bad to say about their dancing really. They danced well, not as good as a Brigadier for Thile, but from a top down perspective. But they danced well and they captured me. So go ahead, Rom.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different tack. I get what you're saying, Sid. I think for me, the lack of, I kind of want to say, like, what are you going to be remembered for, right? What is Theory going to be remembered for? And they're not the best dancing team. They have solid energy. They dance very energetically. They also have, I think, a mix and a type of performance that would allow you to do that. So that's great, but to your point, they're not at a Brigade level of dancing or for Thile level of dancing. Let's be honest, right? They're also at a creativity wise. They're not throwing in the formations. They're not, I think, selling the moments like Brigade where they're playing with dynamics. I think for that performance, one of the things that I struggled with is that it's short, and they really could have benefited. I think even when the guys were on the ground and the women were standing up, I think they could have benefited from some change of pace there, right? Like really sell the moments, slow the mix down. The song choices are fun songs that people know, that people enjoy. Like it's fun to me as an individual listener, but it's not going to amount to anything in the same way it would have happened in person. I don't know if that makes total sense to you, Sid. I just feel like this is one of those performances, that really would have benefited from thinking about how do we capture an audience in a different type of format.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to BAMs, the only good thing that I wrote about BAMs was that they're good, they're solid at dancing. They're not there yet, completely top down. They had a really good location on top of that overlook, and from a creation perspective, I thought that the two triangles into the trapezoid was a nice formation. Everything else I'm writing down, just things that I'm remembering and seeing, just to me weren't good. The transition mix-wise to Fumania was not good. I believe they went to I can't remember the Sherry Mon song. The transition just was not good, and that's just, I shouldn't be writing that down, right? It should just be clean and transition smoothly and well. I shouldn't even have to worry about it. I should just focus on enjoying what I'm watching. Fumania overall from a choreographical perspective. Sorry, my tongue's getting tied. It just looked like it was trying too hard. They were just trying too hard to make a cool Fumania, and it lacked any moments of impact, any moments of cool. Like, as much as we can talk about RVD not being up to par at this competition, the way that they moved into their Fumania was such a sick moment, right? BAMs, even though they're trying. It's like they're trying too hard to create a cool Fumania, and nothing's standing out. Then they did this thing where they popped their hands out right into the drop, and then they did Barty Chal, and it just didn't hit, right? So that kind of moment just needs to be thought through better to make that moment actually have some impact. Just because you're doing something that is different into a Barty Chal doesn't mean it's going to hit, right? And that's really it for them. Sorry for ragging on you guys so hard, but I guess I have higher expectations.
Well, I would say, Sid, if we're going by round two, I 100% agree, right? Like round three videos is where I think they really take their step. And, I started saying, this is a team that I could see competing at blowout. Well, there still is some level of thought that needs to be done. And I thought the reason why they did so well in round three is because they were forced to slow down and take some of their ideas and put them in a slower and a more dynamic routine necessitated by the requirements the competition put itself. This was just so fast and just a lot of random things. This is like the ultimate. I mute this video and I watch this video, and it seems like you could take like it's like the greatest hits of like all these songs, like Fateh Chak, et cetera, and you just throw them in there, and it's chorus after chorus after chorus after chorus, and choreo after choreo after choreo after choreo. The thing about those segments, though, is that they're typically simplistic, and it's just done very well, and it's all about movement. It's all about crushing some steps. And to your point, that they just do a lot of things. Like I'm watching this performance, they just do a lot of things that are unnecessary, right? I think you're exactly spot on. I think the Fumania variation, like the arm pop outs here and there, it doesn't add anything. It's not cool. It's also particularly it's not a way to like emphasize your good dancing in a certain way, right? Like you're really limiting yourself in terms of like the reach. I thought there was a discrepancy with dancers. I thought that became clear over a period of time who was really good, who choreographed the set. That's not something I want to be seeing. We talk about wanting to have some payoff and understand a routine. This is one of those routines where I see a lot of promise, but I don't see a lot of payoff. I don't see a lot of time where I can actually understand what had just occurred. And, I'm not going to lie, I had to watch this video 2 or 3 times before I got a really good perspective on what they were trying to do, which I'll be honest is 2 or 3 times too long.
Yep. So moving on here, we got Bariste. I thought the initial opening when they were doing Fuslan, I thought the way that they were picking everybody up was kind of weird. There wasn't any impact to it. It was just, I don't know. I felt like it was just like, how do we take this step and do it in a very unique way? And that's cool, but I don't know. It just felt weird, and it didn't have any impact for me. And everything after that, I wrote this down. I was like, I'm understanding the combinations and the variations you're doing, but it's not cool. It's not making me react to it, right? There's no impact to it. The Fumania segment was very out there, like very, very out there. At first, if it wasn't for the dole beat in the mix, I would not have known that they were doing Fumania. And then at the end, when they dropped into the Jugnia Fumania, that part was really, really sick. The way they're moving with the mechanism they had with the moving of the V, then they came back and then did the other step to inverse the V. But from an overall perspective, without that, even with that, there really wasn't any impact in what they were doing. It was just really cool. I guess. I wouldn't even say they were cool. They were just move combos and variations that did flow together, but again, no impact. So that was my reaction to Bariste.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different tack. I really liked the Fumania the Fumania choreography and the conversation that it sparks. I'm a little bit different than you in saying that I definitely agree it's out there. However, to your point, and I think you touched upon this with the Fuslan, it's some of the dancing right before, like when they get into the V and they're doing the little flourishing movement side to side, that's, to me, is good execution. But I thought that there was an element of, the choreography around the Fumania segment not hitting. Maybe it was because the speed of the entire segment is the same, where it's just a little bit monotonous and it's a slower speed. That might have a little bit to do with it. But I also think there's a lot of choreography here that doesn't necessarily emphasize like a really good, really like strong dancing, right? Like a lot of it is, there's a lot of motion. There's a lot of different variations in the moves. And I'm kind of wondering, right, like where did they dance super well on? Like what did they dance super well on? The Fumania is definitely very different. I thought the Jugini piece and then the transition back with the flourishing with the arms going into like a Laria move was something that was going to be that. But then there's just a lot of minor nifty variations where I'm like, the dancing kind of suffers a little bit. And the one point where I think the dancing really works well is when they're doing the Beatty at the end, and then they start getting into a little bit of the Baith case. But even then, it's not done in a way where, like the Jadu Singa right before then, you do the step and then you vary it out a little bit. And then there's a little bit of cracks where some people are getting really low and ripping the choreography. Some people are kind of standing up and kind of envisioning how they're going to do the variation afterwards, it's not as crisp. And I would say from a dancing perspective overall, it's not at the same level of dancing as a big brigade and as a fourth delay.
Awesome. So moving on to CIA, the start. Just speaking very frankly here, the start. Like one of the dudes that came in from screen side right, he was off from everybody else, and it's going to attract the attention of a judge immediately, right? And so you want to make sure that everything is just crisp and on point, and that's kind of what my thing will be for CIA as a whole. Is from an overall dancing perspective, I want to see them get better, especially from a footwork perspective. When they're doing the full money, I really wrote down need better footwork, right, for it so that it stands out, so you know exactly what step that you're. From a viewer's perspective, you want to know exactly what step that the dancers are doing. I know later in there, I wrote down need to finish footwork, right. So what that means is don't cut it short on beat 4, right. You're doing 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say you're doing Prataka legs. You don't want that fourth step. Like if you quit on that fourth step or don't finish it, it's very obvious and it doesn't look good. It kind of looks like you might even be cheating and going to the next step a little bit too early. And overall, for all the dancers, I just want you guys to don't make it look like you want to be selling your choreography. You don't want to make it look like it's hard to do or anything like that. Even if it is hard to do, you don't want to make it look like that. You want to make it look like it's the most fun thing you're doing, right? And from a choreographical perspective, we talked about this earlier. Just the thought that needs to go into it. When they dropped for the body jaw, everybody was facing each other, and so there's essentially no audience engagement with that moment, and it makes it fall flat because the audience can't. It's hard to react to it. They're all 90 degrees facing in, but if you imagine they were all facing forward, it would have that impact, right? It had the chance to do it, but it didn't do it. And the drop with towards the end where they were just using one arm to kind of move, I think that had you added the body to, if it was just the arm moving and the body being going with the arm, it would have brought it out more, right? But as it stood, it kind of just doesn't look like anything, right? So the whole, we want to think these things a little bit deeper on that perspective too.
I would agree with everything you said. I'm not going to obviously repeat some of the things you said. I do want to just touch on just one small thing, though, and don't want to dive too much deeper, but would say that the end, if you're going to end that way, it's the ending was super flat, right? It's just, again, systemic of, I think, the entire performance, but getting the body in there, executing that at the same level. I think some people were just doing the forearm, some people were doing the whole arm. That's like a very easy visual of where there needs to be changes moving forward for this performance and for the dancers to get you to be competitive, because it's the one time in the set where everyone's at the front. You can see everybody, and you can tell clearly what's going on, and it's an easy diagnosis point. But that brings me to the next point, which is you did yourself no favors by recording in the dark in a specific format where you're recording from the feet, so that if you're further back, you're almost indistinguishable, right? You need to literally be on top of the camera. So having the camera at like hip level or even like chest level for a person would have done a lot better, because it would have been easier to see people and understand some of the movement. I think what was hard for me is I'm watching the performance again. I'm seeing dancers make mistakes in the front, and they're the only dancers I can focus on because they're the only dancers I can actually see. And that becomes a little bit of an issue where you're having 2 or 3 dancers, you're losing sight of it, and the overall picture gets lost. So when you're going about this again, I would pay special attention to that. Up the audio quality, shoot it in the light, or if you're not able to shoot in the light, like wear lighter clothing so it's much easier for you to be seen. Some of those like simple measures will go a long way for a performance, because you don't have that kind of luxury that you would normally have.
Absolutely. All right, and so moving on to FCB. Start off, strong dancing, the beginning, powerful, strong. The slowdown that kind of happened immediately I thought was kind of strange. The summy under the plane was awesome. I wish that there was more to it. I don't know how you put more to it. I don't have the answer right now, but the incorporation of that was awesome, and I do wish that more teams did more things like that, because the sky is essentially the limit. Like we're not. You can't do that in a venue. Whatever they just did, they can't do it in a normal venue, and there's no there's no really no rules that you really have to abide by that a venue presents, right? So I thought that was awesome that they decided to do that and make the effort to build all that stuff and execute it pretty well. I love the V formation. Once they got into the V, they did the clap, the kitsch into the Jandu Singh. I thought that variation was really awesome, and it hit. I wrote this down on the first beat of Fasla. In the mix, there was a little like some sort of sound effect, and so the audio was like the audio and the visual didn't match because the dancers didn't have that extra bit of oomph on that first beat of Fasla, and so that I think that just should have been there. The intro of the Fumania was kind of whatever, and I think that definitely hurt FCB overall.
Yeah, I mean, the Summy idea, I wish it was done at a different portion of the set where it was like the chorus or it was a payoff moment. It doesn't feel
key.
Like a payoff, right?
That's key. Yep, you're right.
And I would say the other thing, with the performance is, the fuss-on variation with the tippy taps. I see a lot of teams doing that. This is one of those things where it definitely hurt that you did a variation like this, right? You probably didn't expect it, but every team did a very similar tippy tap kind of tippy tap mechanism, right? Where you do the over, you do the overfoot, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I'm just going to keep calling it tippy taps, but I think 3 or 4 teams did that, and in a format, it's in a format where rounds go back to back. If a team does it in one round, it doesn't do it another, or a team does it in both rounds, or just over a period of time, a judge is going to see that. They're going to notice that. And so my concern here is that that's a big part of this performance was that variation. And in some ways, I felt that other teams doing it had cheapened it and made it something where I was like, oh, this is the thing, because it's not new. It's something you're going to see. And so I would challenge FCB as a team to think of a different variation, or at least a different drop, something that people were going to pick up on. I would say the other thing, like the dancing is solid. It's very, very good. I would say that the dancing variations could have been better, right? The execution, some of the different types could have been better. I think you could have played around with some of the pacing better. And to Sid's point, I think some of the things that you did from a pacing perspective were awkward in this situation and could be improved on. And then, it seems to me, I don't know if this is the right takeaway. It just feels that way after watching this performance. It feels like everyone was kind of super jazzed for the Kunde coming over and was kind of anticipating that. And then writing that out was like, let's dance very well. Well, there's no audience. No one's going to give you a lot of brownie points for doing it. It's really, really good. I would say that some of the dancing, there's, at the back, I saw 2 of the dancers going a little bit early. There's a level of anticipation that's happening here. There's a level of tepidness. I don't think you ripped the steps as much as you possibly could have, where you were really focusing on the shoulders, really focusing on, your body and your overall nakra. And, when you think about it compared to, like a brigade who's doing Bedi and they're going kind of all out and they're going very hard. That's a challenge. And then when you're comparing like the variations and also the fact that it seems like some of your variations are derivative and you're looking at a team like Fortile, which is trying to push the envelope and do different things, I can see why you're not scoring as hard, right? Ultimately, I think the set's in the right place. The ideas are there. This is the only team that really pushed the envelope in terms of what you can and cannot do in the environment that you're in. It just seems like at a very basic level, at the things that are inside the box, not outside the box, there's a lot left to be desired in terms of how do you get into those upper echelon teams. And I think that hurt them at the end of the day.
Sweet. And lastly, we have RVD. I like that little stage that they have. I'm kind of jealous. I don't think we have a stage like that somewhere in Pittsburgh. It was, so the first thing I ended up writing down, it was Into the Jaffa. It was kind of cool, but not really. And kind of felt that way about RVD kind of the whole way through the entire competition, really. The way that they slid into the Fumania, like that was an amazing moment, and I wish that they would do more stuff like that. That stuff that stands out within the rest of the routine. That's how to think about moments. Like it all worked together. The arm motions, everything was clean. It was just really well done. The rest of the Fomania was kind of weird, and it just felt like there was just too much stuff piled in all at once. Right? There's a lot of random folk steps just put in there, just didn't really have any purpose to them. There was a part where the red Geordie was at the front, and they did this thing where they kind of had some rounded motions and they paused, then like kind of ran, jumped onto their right leg and they came up for the thigh slap. And it all just felt weird. And you got to think about that more, just to make sure that it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel, like it's out of place or doesn't flow well. Now, I just should not be feeling that at all. You should get your ideas and everything should just come and go smoothly, and I should just remember them, right? And then last thing I wrote down is the Jundu Singa. Whenever Frozy was in the front, maybe it was a camera angle thing, Rom. I'm not sure, but it just didn't hit like you wanted it to hit. Maybe it was the design aspect of the overall choreography, where it's just those two doing it. Maybe the back Geordies need to be doing something else. But again, it just doesn't hit.
They also spinned into each other.
Yeah,
the two of them literally start coming and almost crash into each other while doing that.
So yeah, that's all I got. Go ahead, Ron.
I was gonna say, that point, to just piggyback off of what you said, when you have that and the little bit off center, it's almost like taking your eyes and then just bringing all the focus into the two dancers in the front. I didn't even see the background. It just became a distraction because those dancers were off center. If you didn't do the extra spins and had just done it in spot without that, the fact that you were essentially like a spinning top kind of losing its center, I thought that was going to be cleaner because it caused, I think, my eyes as a viewer to actually clash with what's going on in the back and what's going on in the front. I didn't get to see all of it. I was more focused on the front, and then everyone in the back became a peripheral distraction for me. To Sid's point, I think if you had ended the segment after the Fomania, after the clear Fomania moves, this would have placed very, very high with the competitive teams. I thought you had done some very good variations. I really liked the dancing at the beginning, like when you squat into I'm thinking like right after the fast jumper, when you do the little spin and then spin back around, and you squat into the move. I thought that was a really good impact moment. It's not super difficult, or it's not super intricate, the variation, but it is super difficult to get that low and stay that low as a team and then pop back up. I thought that was great, right? I thought the moment you started doing arm flourishes where you started pushing your arms out versus pumping them, if that makes sense, things started, to Sid's point, get a little weird. I thought the moves themselves were then becoming a little different to be different. It didn't become really a problem until I'm trying to look at the light cues, but you started doing like a lot of motions where it's almost like your arms were doing how am I going to do this, like a little circular motion. It comes in the middle where I think it's red in the front, right? Yep. I think it starts getting a little weird there, where it's not weird is not the right term for this, but it's a lot of like graceful movement with no real purpose, in my point. The extra movement is not necessary. It's not unique. It's not different. It just seems like a bunch of wasted counts. I thought the fact that you guys did Jodia, I don't think a lot of teams did Jodia. That was cool in the relation to the rest of the set. You do a series at the end of Punjabs where you do the tippy tap footwork that I talked about previously. Again, it's done well, but be mindful that since so many teams do it, it's not a unique thing at that point, right? And if that's going to be the end of your routine, where you're doing a variation that a lot of teams are now copying and doing a very slight variations of, it just takes away from the overall performance. And I thought that you going into that and doing the pose into Jugani afterwards did two things for me. One, it wasn't unique. It felt like a very flat ending. And two, it felt like that was the end of the Fomania, which made the payoff for this Fomania segment, which started, I think, like 20 beats in, Sid, and then went for like a full 40 seconds. Just this very long, convoluted thing. Like if they had done something like that and earlier and then moved on into other choreography, it would have been good for me. But I thought the ending overall left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth of what could have been. Right? It was such a strong start. I like this slide. I like it when this team RBD does nifty things that seem effortless, which is what that slide felt like to me. That slide felt like it was just a very effortless motion. And that's where I think like very nifty choreography becomes very cool, is when you do something nifty and it doesn't seem like a lot of effort was put into it. And it feels like sometimes when they were going a little bit slower, towards the middle, it seems like you lost the plot a little bit. You just want to cut to the chase, man. I really want to just break down this last round and what went down between Fertile and Brigade and why it was the way it was.
Yes, and I shall start. To start with Brigade, I felt like this was easily their overall their not their best of all three videos. I don't know. It didn't feel. I mean, it wasn't because I think the dancers danced at a lower level. I think the choreo didn't have the hits that they wanted them to have, and maybe they were trying a little bit too hard. Again, I also agree with one of your first original points of the packing too much in, because they started off with the intro, then they had the actual segment, and then they had an ending, kind of walk off thing going. It was a lot to try to pack in there, and the flow got hurt by it. The individual moments that they tried to create, again, they just didn't have the level of punch that it needed to be to hang with Fertile, if that makes sense. Because when you look at Fertile's performance, they danced just as well as Brigade did, but they had the moments that make you go wow, right? Especially the one that one moment where they slide back and forth. They had this big sound, this nice sound effect, and they put their arms up in a double drummer for the beginning of High End. When this, if you know what I'm talking about, for Fertiles.
Yep.
That moment was just like, damn. It was just like, wow, right? And that kind of moment didn't happen for Brigade, where it had happened in their previous videos. And then the creativity that I don't know what the song is that they were doing Lurditu with Fertile. You would know, because I don't really follow pop songs too much, I guess. But I know what the song is, and I've heard the song before, and the way that they integrated that into their whole routine, it was super creative. It was nail in the coffin for me. And it was. I think the points reflected exactly like how it should have went down. So I think mostly overall, I think Brigade, just because Brigade did not have those impactful moments, it brought them down. And had they had them, it would have been competitive, in my opinion.
Man, I was really looking for this last performance to be somewhat of a referendum on speed, right? I think a lot of teams walked into this competition saying that speed kills, and cut themselves actually in the process, because a lot of teams went super fast at the beginning, did very similar variations, and then that kind of brought everyone down, right? It just started getting a blur, and Brigade was this different team because they were using dynamics, they were going pacing, and there was a part of me where I watched this Brigade performance and I was like, 4 dancers puts you behind the 8 ball. It doesn't have the same impact. They did, again, a great job of making the 4 dancers seem bigger with their videography choice, the crispness and that played a huge role. And the choreo, up until they started going fast, I was legitimately asking myself a question that, hey, if they kept this whole thing slow, it was going to be, I thought, a very, very difficult finale. Because to me, I wanted this to be a stylistic challenge. I thought that Brigade's best performances and their best moments came when they were going slow, when they were being more purposeful with the dance. And up until that point, the one-arm thing, like the throw-ups when they were doing the chickens, that to me resonated. It wasn't resonated because of the moves, but it set like a specific tone for me. And I thought Brigade was consistently excellent going slow. And then to me, they lost when they sped up. The moment they sped up, it became easier to draw parallels between them and Fertile. And Fertile at speed is just better than Brigade at speed. They have the same dancing caliber and quality. And I thought Brigade actually hurt themselves by going a little bit faster than they normally are accustomed to, because the shoulders didn't happen as much. The legs, the width that we had seen, or not even the width, but just like the stylistic elements that they had seen, like with the consistency across the dancers, you lost a little bit of that when you're going at that speed. And that's, I think, was one of the problems, is the dancing wasn't at that same level. The overall kind of package from a knuckle perspective wasn't at the same level, and Fertile just had them. Right? I'm watching the Fertile performance again, and the number one thing that stands out to me is that I didn't appreciate every single variation, because there were a lot of them, but what I did appreciate was how well those variations were done. Because even if I didn't like the variation, I was like, you still danced phenomenally through it, which is challenging in and of itself, right? And so, if I were Brigade, and I'm thinking about this last performance, one, if I could have gotten 2 more dancers, this might have been a different story, just from an impact perspective. Who knows? Could have gotten COVID. Got to stay safe out there. You never know. But I also think that sticking to their guns. I think the video that we had talked about in the second round with the Jummer going with a little bit more of a slower routine worked so well to what they were trying to achieve with their performances. And the moment they went up to that speed, I don't know if they were trying to say let's play for Thiele's game, or let's play let's try to prove to ourselves that we could dance at that level. I think it's obvious that they can dance at that level. It's just it made it I don't know, it just made it so easy for Thiele to beat them, right? It was just one of those things where I watched this over and over again, and I'm saying stick to the guns, stick to your identity. Thiele won in a large part because they just stayed consistent with that. They just were the same team throughout. I don't know who's doing the Thiele recordings or whatnot, but I thought it was also very poetic that it was done in the rain, right? It's one of those things where, Brigade was doing an India performance, and there's a little bit of that, traditional feel to it. And then Thiele being in the midst of a rainstorm was very oddly poetic. I know these things shouldn't have impacts, but it set the stage up, I think, very nicely for them. But I thought even the Jummer variations that they did, some of them I didn't like when they were in 2 lines and they're clapping and they're moving around. I just thought that was unnecessary. But some of the material right before them, the spins, right, were really good. And I think more importantly, the dancing was very, very just solid throughout. I think the one thing I would tell Thiele is, even some of the Jummer stuff, it would be good to tone it down, especially if a team comes with a little bit more of a simplistic performance that has really good payoff moments. I can see Thiele losing, but to me, there was no question who won. Right? There's a lot of things to unpack in the Thiele performance, but yeah, I think Brigade made it easy for them.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Bhangra Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and Podchaser, as that really helps others find the podcast. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of them at the Bhangra Pod. If you want to know what else is going on in the podcast world, sign up for our newsletter and join our Discord server to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. There will be links to all of those in the show notes.